Well, the time has come for me to wrap up the formal part of my presentation this evening. And I'm going to do that on the subject of Vietnam. From May 62, where we left off in part 4, through November 1963 and the death of JFK. I call it the war and the struggle for power. I'll begin with John Kenneth Galbraith's frank advice to JFK on Vietnam. He was the ambassador to India at the time. A month before the May 1962 order of battle deception in Saigon, discussed in section 4, a power struggle erupted over a reversal of US policy, quote unquote, in Vietnam. So Ambassador John Galbraith told President Kennedy that the USSR was pleased that we would spend our billions of dollars in these distant jungles where it does us no good and them no harm. Who decides what countries are strategic? I'd like to ask him what is so important about Vietnam in the space age. Immediately interested, Kennedy told his advisors to be prepared to seize upon any favorable moment to reduce our commitment to Vietnam, obviously. Already in the middle of a battle with JFK over Cuba, when he heard about the Galbraith proposal, Lemnitzer declared any reversal of US Vietnam policy would be disastrous for Vietnam and for US allies in Asia and elsewhere. So the intensity of the Joint Chiefs' opposition to Galbraith's proposal, and Averell Harriman, the Assistant Secretary of State for Asia and Pacific Affairs, and his disapproval at a 1 May National Security Council meeting sank any chance of a political settlement in Vietnam at the time. In the heat of that struggle with Lemnitzer over Cuba, JFK decided to say nothing more about his intention to pull the US advisors out of Vietnam. While all eyes were on the Soviet arms pouring into Cuba, both JFK and General Taylor were hiding their intentions about Vietnam from each other. The Vietnam battle in Washington fueled the May 1962 order of battle deception and false picture of success fed to McNamara in Saigon. Galbraith's proposal led to a storm that foreshadowed events to come. In 1962, President Kennedy sent Lemnitzer to Europe as the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe and nominated General Taylor for the CJCS slots, both mistakes. Like Lansdale, General Taylor was an ally of Lemnitzer. Anxious to secure the chairman of the Joint Chiefs job, General Taylor said little on Vietnam and hid what he knew about the order of battle deception from JFK. Behind McNamara's back, Taylor would gut JFK's order to begin withdrawing from Vietnam during the weeks before his murder. The high price of the June 1960 Laos settlement. Prince Savannah Phuma declared Laos neutral and objected to the presence of US forces. While all US forces were withdrawn, nearly 10,000 North Vietnamese troops remained, and the US did not make it a casus belli. After the Laos settlement was ratified by the Geneva Conference, the upsurge of Soviet soldiers in arms arriving in Cuba began in July. A week before the 13-day Cuban Missile Crisis began, President Kennedy ordered the withdrawal of all US military forces from Laos, leaving the communists free to infiltrate into South Vietnam. What was happening in Vietnam was, as Neil Sheehan wrote in his book, a bright, shining lie. Lieutenant Colonel John Paul Vann was the US advisor to Colonel Cao, the 7th Division commander in the best division in the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, ARVN. Vann told the senior American advisor in 3 Corps that he doubted Cao's battlefield claims. Vann felt that ARVN's so-called battle successes were, quote, walks in the sun, unquote. Cao was afraid to fight the VC. After killing a few, he would let the rest go. In July, President Diem threatened to deny Cao a promotion to Corps commander when Cao lost 20 men in one fight. That brought an end to any effective 7th Division operations against the Viet Cong for the rest of 1962, losing only 3 dead. And Colonel Cao did get his promotion. So the myth of battlefield success is shaken, but General Taylor reassures. Ambassador at Large Bowles, told Secretary of State Dean Rusk that the continuing deterioration in Vietnam could force a choice between sending in US combat troops or a total withdrawal of the US advisors. And he was right. That's why the deception was going on. Back in Vietnam in August of 1962, Saigon US Consul Joseph Mendenhall said the war could not be won with Diem, therefore get rid of Diem. Let me repeat that. Back from Vietnam in August 62, Saigon US Consul Joseph Mendenhall said the war could not be won with Diem, therefore get rid of Diem. In September, General Taylor went to Vietnam, brushed aside John Paul Van's truthful report, and then returned to JFK with a false report of much progress. At the Battle of Ap Bac, all hell breaks loose. On 2 January 1963, 10 US helicopters helped discharge 3 battalions, that would be 18 companies worth, of the ARVN 7th Division to surround 2 Viet Cong companies. In the absence of unity of command and coordination of fire maneuver, the operation was doomed. ARVN losses were 80 dead and more than 100 wounded. US losses were 3 dead, 8 wounded, and the loss of 5 helicopters. So the Battle of Ap Bac is looked at as a turning point. And at that time, the CIA began to challenge the Viet Cong strength figures that MACV was putting out. They didn't like what Harkins was saying about winning. If, as MACV claimed, the Viet Cong strength had increased from 17,600 to 24,000, while suffering 3,000 casualties, a reasonable person would be justified in asking, just who are we fighting out there? The CIA report said that these statistics suggested that, quote, the casualty figures are exaggerated, or the Viet Cong have a remarkable capability, or both. In other words, the Viet Cong would have to have recruited 37,000 men in less than 12 months. The big lie was falling apart. In the spring of 1963, the web of deception in Vietnam was still deepening. By the end of 62, President Kennedy suspected that Harkin's reports of battlefield success were fiction. So he sent Senator Mike Mansfield to investigate in Vietnam. Mansfield returned with a pessimistic report. My book, JFK in Vietnam, actually my dissertation, JFK in Vietnam, broke the story that by early 1963, Kennedy and McNamara were working on a secret withdrawal plan. Secretary Rusk and General Taylor were excluded. Knowing his Vietnam policy was a failure, JFK was planning to begin pulling out US advisors in 1964 and everybody out after his reelection. But publicly, JFK opposed a US withdrawal. He said, sitting there with the Mansfield, he said, I got angry with Mike for disagreeing with our policy so completely, and I got angry with myself because I found myself agreeing with him. And then came the Buddhist crisis. Things got worse, a whole lot worse. In April 1965, Tuk, the Archbishop of Hue, and Diem's brother, encouraged the flying of papal flags, while Khan, the Hue government chief and also a brother of Diem, banned the display of religious flags just before the Buddha's birthday. When the Buddhists flew their flags anyway on 8 May, the Catholic deputy province chief ordered his troops to fire on the crowd. In June, the Diem government's lie that a Viet Cong agent's grenade triggered a stampede was exposed by films of troops firing into the crowds. And that caused thousands of Buddhists to swarm into the streets in demonstrations. When the smoke cleared on 9 May, 15 Buddhists were injured and 7 killed, including 2 children crushed by armored vehicles. The Buddhist crisis deepened, continuing in June through July and August of 1963. The US pressured Diem to mollify the Buddhists. And on 14 June, JFK replaced Ambassador Nolting with Henry Cabot Lodge in Saigon. On 10 July, a special national intelligence estimate, CIA estimate on South Vietnam concluded that if the Diem regime failed to appease the Buddhists, more demonstrations would result, along with the strong possibility of a coup attempt in Vietnam. On 21 August, after 7 more monks and 1 nun put the match themselves, Diem placed South Vietnam under martial law, and his brother Nhu ordered raids on pagodas, resulting in arrests of 1,400 Buddhists. It was on 11 June that Thich Quang Duc shocked the world and electrified South Vietnam by becoming the first monk to burn himself to death. The Buddhist crisis caused the political bottom to fall out of South Vietnam, whose generals began plotting a coup against Diem and his brother Nhu. In August, US officials were as divided in Washington as they were in Saigon over a coup. President Kennedy was away at Hyannisport when Roger Hilsman, Assistant Secretary of State for Far Eastern Affairs, and the pro-coup group falsely convinced their foes that JFK had approved a coup, and a go-ahead cable was sent to Saigon on 24 August. Crucially, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs Taylor managed to hide during this charade. For the next week, chaos reigned in the White House meetings. Then the generals in Saigon called off the coup. JFK went back to Hyannisport, and an angry LBJ told a high-level White House meeting, "Stop playing cops and robbers." The 8th through 10 September 1963 Krulak-Mendenhall trip to Vietnam. Due to a 3 September Robert Kennedy request for views on the war effort by US advisors in South Vietnamese units, McNamara and Taylor sent the Pentagon Saxa, the Special Assistant for Counterinsurgency and Special Activities, General Krulak, and balanced by the State Department's Joseph Mendenhall, to Vietnam to find out what was happening. So they briefed JFK on 10 September when they got back. Krulak had spoken to 80 US advisors and told JFK that despite Diem's defects, the war would be won if the current US military and civil programs were pursued. Mendenhall talked to South Vietnam and US civilian officials and said he found a virtual breakdown of the government in Saigon in an atmosphere of fear, and that the war could not be won if Diem's brother Nhu remained in Vietnam. Incredulous, Kennedy asked, "The two of you did visit the same country, didn't you?" Now let me turn to the genesis of Op Plan 34A and the Americanization of the war in Vietnam. According to the 6th May Secretary of Defense Conference agenda, item number 5, South Vietnam operations against the North, was being reported separately by General Krulak. But the State Department history says no such record has been found. The reason for that is outrageous. General Taylor was planning to approve CINCPAC, Commander-in-Chief Pacific, Operations Plan 34A while hiding it from McNamara and JFK. Taylor sat on the plan for several months before allowing it to be shown to McNamara at the 20 November Honolulu conference, 2 days before the Kennedy assassination. Now let me add a few things here that I should put on the table. In Volume 4, Armageddon, I'm vetting the hypothesis that General Taylor, who at the time was still just the military aide to Kennedy, was actually a Trojan horse who had penetrated the inner sanctum of the Kennedy administration. And I'm also tracking the evidence that beginning in early May 63, General Taylor and General Krulak were secretly working behind Secretary McNamara's back on an up plan to Americanize the war in Vietnam. And so this is what I have so far. Let me go to the next slide. The CINCPAC, the Commander-in-Chief Pacific Op Plan 3463, eventually became Op Plan 34A. Anyway, 3463's hazy history began with the disappearance of Krulak's presentation in May, in the May 63 SecDef meeting. When Taylor finally put it on the table in front of McNamara at the 20 November SecDef meeting in Honolulu, it included the unilateral use of American forces against North Vietnam. Taylor's secret plan for American covert operations against North Vietnam remained pigeonholed. JFK never saw it. It was put into play, as I say, 48 hours before his murder, and it led directly to the Gulf of Tonkin resolution and full-scale American intervention in the Vietnam War. President Kennedy's needs. JFK was desperate to preserve his plan to begin the US extrication from Vietnam in 1964. But the political collapse of the Diem regime during the summer of 1963 with the Buddhist crisis forced JFK to start it right away in order to, quote, cast it in concrete, unquote, before the interventionists had time to react. JFK then decided to send McNamara to Vietnam and told him to return with a secret proposal to begin the withdrawal so JFK could use it as he saw fit. Now, President Kennedy included General Taylor on the trip, but without letting him know about the plan. Taylor thought the 1,000-man pullout was only a trick to pressure Diem. That is the 1,000-man pullout in 63. General Krulak was used in Washington to maintain constant contact with the operation in Vietnam, McNamara-Taylor trip, so that Kennedy could play the key role in shaping the final recommendations at the last minute. At a stopover in Honolulu on the way back, the 1,000-man withdrawal was slipped into the report. On the final leg of the journey, Assistant Undersecretary of State William Sullivan saw it and went postal, and McNamara agreed to scrub it when Sullivan threatened to write a dissenting report. And so the 1,000-man withdrawal for the end of 1963 was excised in the Honolulu version of the report. After the helicopter landed and McNamara and Taylor joined Kennedy in the White House briefing room after a photo op with the leather-bound report at the coffee table, JFK listened to an oral summary of the McNamara-Taylor report's recommendations. Then, while the onlookers had to remain in their leather seats, the president, on cue, directed McNamara and Taylor into the Oval Office for a private discussion. When the three men emerged, McNamara ordered the recommendation on the 1,000-man withdrawal to be put back into the report. And then President Kennedy just steamrolled over his opposition. JFK's National Security Advisor, McGeorge Bundy, and the Assistance for Policy Support from the CIA, Chester Cooper, Joint State Department's Assistant Undersecretary of State William Sullivan, and Assistant Secretary William Bundy, all of them together to plead their opposition to the 1,000-man withdrawal in vain all day long. But they were just subordinates. The principals, Secretary of Defense McNamara, Secretary of State Rusk, and Director of Central Intelligence McCone stood with JFK. In a meeting at the end of the day, JFK steamrolled over his opposition and demanded obedience and declared, "We have a policy." To avoid being overly optimistic, JFK sent McNamara out to the White House steps to make the announcement so that the withdrawal would be his recommendation, not JFK's, thus giving the president some time to wait and see before making it his call. The somewhat secret National Security Action Memorandum 263. JFK left himself the option of implementing the 1,000-man withdrawal as he saw fit, and the way he saw fit was to do so secretly. So on 5 October, JFK approved the McNamara-Taylor military recommendations but JFK insisted that the pullout of 1,000 men by the end of 1963 had to remain secret for the time being. JFK's opposition leaked his secret pullout and appeared in the New York Times. On 11 October, National Security aide McGeorge Bundy said we might as well formally write it up, the 2 October decision in NSAM 263, if it's in the newspapers. It also included, by the way, that NSAM, pictured here, a telegram for Ambassador Lodge, it's in paragraph 3 here, green lighting a coup in South Vietnam. The 1 November execution of the Diem and New brothers. On 9 October, the message sent to Lodge and the generals in South Vietnam was, while we do not wish to stimulate a coup, we do not wish to thwart a change of government. JFK's 23 October guidance that the burden of proof that the coup could succeed rested with the generals did not discourage them. Diem and New were executed on 1 November, both shot in the nape of the neck. During a meeting the next morning, JFK was shown a cable with the news of the terrible outcome. General Taylor described JFK's visceral reaction. Quote, he leapt to his feet and rushed from the room with a look of shock and dismay on his face, which I had never seen before. He had always insisted that Diem must never suffer more than exile. Turning to the Honolulu agenda and the end of the optimistic interlude. In mid-October, news from Lodge in Saigon exposed McVee's charade of military success. When General Taylor and the chiefs, who had supported the myth of success by McVee's myth of success, discovered JFK's true intent to pull out of Vietnam, they secretly reversed course and planned to deny Kennedy a pullout based upon a winning scenario. Taylor, Krulak, and others that I will mention in my volume 4, Armageddon, continued to work behind McNamara's back on the secret Op Plan 34A to Americanize the war while gutting Kennedy's 1,000-man pullout. Then the chiefs confronted McNamara with the truth 2 days before Kennedy's assassination at the SecDef conference in Honolulu. NSAM 273. So NSAM 273 was originally written by McGeorge Bundy the day before Kennedy was assassinated. And then it was revised after the assassination on 26 November. The key part of the change in NSAM 273 was to allow the Americanization of the war. Paragraph 7 was the key. What you're looking at here, McGeorge Bundy's 21 November draft on the top left only called for increasing Vietnamese resources to step up the war effort. Bundy told me on 24 November, LBJ told him to strike that paragraph completely, thus the 2 big hash marks through there. At that time, JFK's body was still laying in state at the Capitol Rotunda. But you can see the difference, top right. Bundy's 26 November final NSAM on on LBJ's orders reversed JFK's NSAM 263 and allowed war planners to implement Op Plan 34A. You can see here that if you're a war planner, if you read the fine print here, there's nothing that ruling out direct American action in Vietnam now. JFK's assassination opened the gates of hell. During the days before his assassination, his withdrawal plan withered, while Op Plan 34A sprouted on 20 November. 4 days after the assassination, withdrawal plan died, while the plan for US intervention in Vietnam blossomed. In January, LBJ approved General Krulak's proposal for Op Plan 34A DeSoto patrols by United States Navy destroyers in the Tonkin Gulf to paint North Vietnam's electronic intelligence defenses and support infiltration into North Vietnam. The 2 August incident involving the USS Maddox was the match that lit the tinderbox. It led the US Congress to pass the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, issuing a blank check for LBJ to wage war against North Vietnam. We now turn to the conclusion of my presentation this evening. With President Kennedy gone, both Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King stepped into to stop the coming Holocaust in Vietnam, but they too paid the ultimate price. Beside the American dead, 4 million Vietnamese died in that war. Most countries in the world along the supply routes to Vietnam became targets of coups by both the US and the USSR. I will leave it to others to figure out how many shooters were involved in the Dealey Plaza murder. My current working hypothesis, which I could always change, but right now, this is what it is. JFK was assassinated in a coup d'etat. The center of this conspiracy was in the military, with assistance by elements of the Central Intelligence Agency. I would now be happy to take more questions.